Hi, I'm Mark Tyrell, and this is Talking Textiles, where we talk to successful companies about their experiences in the fabric industry. This podcast is brought to you by the Canada division of the Advanced Textile Association, a not-for-profit trade association representing the international specialty fabrics marketplace. ATA hosts several exciting events throughout the year, including the annual expo happening October 12th to 14th, 2022 in Charlotte, North Carolina. Expo 2022 is the textile and specialty fabrics industry's flagship show for sourcing, networking, and education. To learn more about the expo and other upcoming events, visit textiles.org/events. On today's episode, we'll be speaking with Jamie Gallagher, owner of Multi-Build Solutions Group, manufacturers of awnings, architectural fabric structures, and more. We'll learn about Jamie's experience in the textile industry, his achievements, and the family business. And now, let's talk textiles. Welcome, everyone, to Talking Textiles. This podcast is brought to you by the Canada division of Advanced Textiles Association, formerly known as IFAI. I'm Mark Tyrell, and I'm joined by co-host Melinda Norman-Lee. Welcome to the podcast team, Melinda.
Thank you.
Thank you all for tuning in to this podcast focused on the Canadian textile business. Today, we are interviewing Jamie Gallagher of Multi-Build Solutions Group, a team of professionals that build and manufacture fabric structures, architectural products, canopies, shades, and more. Jamie has been in the fabric engineering business for over 50 years. Jamie, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Mark and Melinda.
One of the things we love to do on the podcast, Jamie, is because our industry is probably one of the industries out there that has the least structured education system to steer people to the industry. People come at it from all kinds of different angles. So we love to hear how people got into the business that they're in and how they came to be where they are, because we find that it's so varied and always presents an interesting backstory. And you go as far back as what you think is relevant, and let us know how you got to where you are today.
Well, I guess my background, of course, I was born into the industry like many people, and a lot of us are family oriented, family business, small family businesses. My dad bought into Soapers, where I started, and I worked with my three older brothers, but I worked on the tent and awning division out of Toronto, Soper Tent and Awning. Anyway, so I kind of grew up in it and swept floors and learned my way along, installed tents as a kid during the summer, and did other academic and traveling pursuits, and came back and got into the tent rental sales role, and developed a passion for fabric tension structures, and got back into the manufacturing side of the business. Was invited or coordinated, I guess, with my dad and Dick Seaman to come down and work at Seaman Corporation down in Florida when the Desert Storm was going on, and learned about the manufacturing sort of side of the business, and then came back to our main business in Hamilton, which was Robert Soper Limited. Worked my way again through sales, industrial products, and then up into a sales management position, and then into an ownership role with my oldest brother, Lincoln.
Out of curiosity, I don't think I knew about Seaman Corp down in Florida. So was that just kind of a segue or that you got involved with? Is that and it was specific to military?
Well, it was. We were in the midst of selling our tent rental division. In fact, I was kind of at that age where it's something I could have bought into or bought or taken over. And to be honest, all my summer life was used up doing tent work, and I had no desire, thinking that would never be my future, that I wanted to be a tent guy, because I wanted to enjoy a summer. But of course, looking back, it's a great business, and Toronto, we don't have the Pikes and Soper world anymore, because they consolidated under the direction of Horst Hornum, who had a long-term vision at that time. He died, the vision faded, and all the companies that he bought, sort of the dream of where that was going, lost its direction. So it was a great opportunity, well, for the likes of Melinda, whose father-in-law, John Lee, worked for Pikes, and he was another visionary, hands-on guy that got things done. Looking back, I look at my dad and my uncle, Harold Gallagher, who owned Pikes, the D Pike Company, both sort of 1870s vintage companies. They were true leaders, and they had great employees that made things. They really were passionate about what they did. They did great rental, event, coordinated tent work. In fact, that was before there was a tent or an event industry, which became ISIS, and we have some great people along the way, the likes of Michael McCullough, Regal Tent. Later that he bought into. He was my actual sales manager when I was in the sales side. And anyways, that's a whole world in itself, because the tents have now grown into large organizations that have incredible depth and inventory and reach. But it doesn't happen without having event coordinators that put these things together and can state or share a vision of where it's got to go, and then an execution side of it. So maybe that all circles back to why I got so interested in tension structures, because all of this, my world was to articulate or help the customer articulate their expectation. And this is always either the success or failure of a project is how well it's articulated, break down what the scope is, and then or delineate the scope, and then put the right team together to execute what that expectation is. I think the Seaman was a great experience because that was the segue from the tent rental world into manufacturing. And I think that they were a great platform for quality control, watching or being part of a growing business. Dick Seaman at the time, Jim Krakowski, who was my boss down in Florida, were growing Seaman Corporation significantly. Like they had sort of ambitious, what do they call it? BHAG, big, hairy, audacious goals of what they were going to do with that business. And, and same thing, they had to develop a good group of people that would execute and make that happen. Because I think they were sort of at a $15 million mark, and they very quickly got over the $30 and $50 million areas. Anyways, but they were and they exposed me to a lot of quality control processes and leadership development processes, which it wasn't just me, it was they exposed to their employees. So as I took a supervisory role down there, as I say, that was Desert Storm. So we were making deployable structures. There was an aluminum steel fabrication component to the business, and then there was the fabric membrane manufacturing. And so I worked on the fabric side. And anyways, it was great exposure. And so I brought a lot of that knowledge and information back to Soapers when I came back. Anyways, it was great. Good experience. So, but Seaman, I've always enjoyed our relationship with the Seamans and Frank Bradenberg and a lot of the principals that are still there, and good crew.
You mentioned you learned a lot from Seaman, and you also mentioned though that you had some tremendous leaders or role models within Soapers. In I think you mentioned your Uncle Harold and your dad. I'm curious there because I've had my own experiences with this coming from a family business, but how were they about kind of teaching the next generation and passing on some of that knowledge, and also even accepting input from the next generation? Because I've definitely seen some pros and cons that way. I'm guessing it might have been a good thing that you were able to step out for a little bit and get a little bit more education from the outside. Because I find sometimes it's not so forthcoming from the inside or from within a family. They might just assume you're picking it up as you go along.
Well, interesting. It's funny, of course, since my dad's passed, and a lot of these, I look back with tremendous respect, because of course in fact, as I hire salespeople on our team, I attribute a lot to my parents, my father, who taught and demanded sort of sales training. So of course, Dale Carnegie and things that I'd gone out to, it was pretty simple exposure. But those are the fundamentals of how to win friends and influence people. If somebody needs a good book to read, that's it. In fact, just go online and watch the video, because it's just a great message. And it's not just about sales, it's about how we live our lives and how we engage in relationships and how we promote others to talk, so we can learn and enjoy what a relationship can be by who people are, because everybody's just so fascinating and fun to be with if you find that thing they're passionate about. And so sales isn't a difficult I don't think it's a difficult thing for me. What is difficult sometimes is to get to the core of the purpose of our relationships, whether they're sales or personal. And I think of, it's funny, I guess I mentioned Seaman, and I should be careful because I've had great relationships with other fabric manufacturers who, and again, I'll bring this back to Soapers, we manufactured air structures for the likes of Yaden and Farley and all the people that have started up along the way, because we had the capacity to do that. And of course, through that we met, or we used, the Haywinkles, Ferraris, the Versailles eggs. We've used all different fabrics that are out in the market. And I guess we had the luxury of seeing performance over 10, 15, 20 years of these things we did. So we always had some good reports coming back of what was good and what was bad, and what relationships with suppliers were, who stood behind what they did. And again, that's a learning experience. I'll tell you an anecdote about Vintex, because they were our liner supplier forever. And we had, and then we had some seam separation issues down in Louisiana, which we blamed on the heat. And then, of course, we started looking at top coat. I think we got mad at them and said, this is your product and your responsibility to fix. And these are huge costs when you have to go and try to field weld liner back in place on a bubble, you can imagine. Anyways, that really, we found and went through many other liner suppliers, only to come back and say, this is still the best product we've ever used. How do we come back and work with a favorable supplier? And so we re-engaged, and we developed our otherwise strained relationship with Vintex, who are currently, I guess, owned by Cooley. They were bought by, anyway, still up in Mount Forest. Anyways, I think because I've said this to Melinda tons of times, I've got a huge list of an axis of evil list of bad suppliers, and a very small good list of good quality and relationships and suppliers who get things done, steel, cables, fabric, and fabricators alike. So I think that's huge. And I'm always respectful of the awning industry. I always find that they have a great, not just association, but the camaraderie and the communication between the people in that group is huge. And that helps not just on business acumen issues, it's supplier and collective buying and sort of promoting good. And these become the outcomes. It's where the Tricans came from, and the buying groups that became source locations for that industry. Anyways, the industry at large is awesome. It's a good collaborative group of people for the most part, because there's some goofs out there as well. But what would life be without? We need those people to remember what the good people are like.
That's fair enough. Sometimes you need that contrast.
Exactly.
Well, listen, it sounds like from the outset, at Soapers and that with your dad, it sounds like the focus really was on people. And by the way, I actually have also taken that Dale Carnegie course, the how to win friends and influence people, and basically the whole course for like 10 weeks or whatever. I did it with Future Electronics, which is my former employer in the electronics industry. They were big on that, on like the sales and relationship, and big on training. So I was fortunate to have that exposure. Also did some pretty crazy sales stuff initially, but I'm actually I'm wondering if that's kind of what put you on track. It sounds like it was a very customer centric focus. Like you guys didn't really just focus on the product that you were doing. It was really about giving customers what they wanted and developing those relationships with customers. I'm guessing, and it sounds, you mentioned that seemed to be what brought you to what you're doing today. Do you want to give us a bit of a bit of a rundown of what your business looks like today in terms of how it's set up, how you're doing? I think it's something that's not completely unique in the industry, but something that people are often not familiar with, because you really kind of, work in a network, and you do things that are very, a lot of the industry does custom stuff, but I think what you're doing is often very cutting edge, and you're kind of coming up with concepts and stuff along with the customers, and then figuring out how to build it through your network and through your supplier network.
Well captured, because that's exactly. And I think personally, I always wanted to be a product guy, meaning that I had a product to bring to market and be able to sell it. And at the end of the day, I've come to the realization that we and my current role, we are solution people. And I think we are sought after as being solvers of and solution providers. Now that comes back to product, of course, and tension structures have always been a fun, creative, expressive, sexy part of the business, but they're not consistent. It's always bumpy because we don't uncover enough projects to make it. So we always have to find a mix of what are the things we do. So we're product and service oriented, and multi-build is the result of course, after Soapers, I started Tensile Integrity, which was purely fabric or architectural fabric tension structures, which led into other. We do stainless steel structures, mostly creative and custom expression. So glue lam, steel, wood, aluminum, and then different mediums in the cables and rope tie out or tensioning methods and techniques. And then I have always worked with my other brother, Jeff Gallagher, who owned or operates. He set up, his background is kind of, he left Soapers early, worked with air structures, got into frame supported structures in a pretty focused way, and then decided that there was a real opportunity to finish projects. Almost in the general construction world, it's that, the 10% that guys walk away from because sometimes it's not worth finishing. He looked at that and said, I could probably just make a business out of cleaning things up. And so he set up installation services to do just that, with a really good group of guys out of Coverall and Summit, and there was some guys down in the States. So I lean on him for installation support on projects that I do. So he's one of my trusted vendors for all intents purpose. And then it sort of reversed the role where I ended up playing a role more for him, helping project manage the things that he was taking on, selling frame structures and such, and supporting other manufacturers. And this is an age-old issue. Is somebody wants to be a manufacturer, in order to provide a turnkey package, you need installation. So you need design, you need manufacturing capability to put everything together, and then you need the installation. And ideally, you bring installation to the very beginning where you're in the design mode, because that's usually your highest cost is field work and doing corrective action, unless you've got it really well laid out and planned out. Unfortunately, that always comes, there's the last minute Larry of actually delivering it and getting it installed, and never taking into consideration at what stage is a site when you get there. And that's whether it's an awning or a tent or whatever. If you can anticipate what's going on or dictate what's going to be going on, so you can have clear and free access and get in there and get your job done as quickly as possible, that's good. And knowing that a lot of what we do is events. So I think Jeff and I bonded probably the most. We did the Olympics out in Vancouver, Vanoc, I think back in 2010. And we just became a great little dynamic team that people said, oh, well, here, you seem to be done what you're doing now. Can you come over and help us here? And so we just took on a ton of extra scope, worked with Rainier, who made some pretty cool recognition towers, but we carried the full contract for it. And anyways, it was a big coup for us. And so we then went after event-based applications, knowing that there was a hard end date that we needed to work to. And of course, that fits into a great installation capability, like the tent industry, because usually weddings don't get altered because you didn't get the tent up on time. And anyway, so we're driven by that. So multi-build sort of extends. So Jeff and I partnered to start this as a new company. So IFS and Tensile Integrity dovetailed into this current operating business. And it is just that, multi-build, that we take on additional scope of site work and concrete work and piers and other things that are not truly our scope, our discipline, but we work and find people to bring to the table and round this broader turnkey offering. And that's it, but it's still bumpy because we can't get a nice flow because we're not product guys. We're not standard product offerers, it becomes more now specialty construction, but we're motivated by the installation side of it, the demands that come from the industry that we will help others out, as well as finding projects of our own, which becomes obviously competitive with those that we look to offer services to. So it's never a clean and simple transaction, but we are solution oriented resources to the market, to the world, and have done work around the world with that sort of philosophy.
You're talking, you and Jeff, building teams to do these special projects and events and in builds and installs. How do you find those special people that can keep up with you?
They don't. I'd love to think that they don't keep up, but there is, I'll just say we've been super fortunate, but it comes back to that axis of evil list, right? You cycle through, and for the most part, we have run across and have hired some great guys that do site supervision and represent our interests in the field. Now, a lot of the cases we work side by side with them, and we've lost a ton of them just because we didn't have continuity of work. We've kept people employed and engaged with no work for up to half a year, but just little tasks and jobs to improve who we are as a business. But it's almost like general contractors who find a good superintendent. And these guys are so special if you can find somebody that's multitasked or multi-knowledgeable and construction and tool smart, who can also talk to a customer and communicate well and present well. Anyways, I think, how do we find them? Because we've been across North America doing various jobs, majority of them are probably introductions from others, from our current employees, and that they reference somebody, and we encourage our employees we pay our employees if they bring somebody, we give them a reference package or a deal so that everybody's encouraged to bring capable, like-minded resources to the table. So that's probably one way where we find it. And otherwise, it's picking up the phone and as running into somebody along the way and say, "What are you doing slinging coffee? I got a job for you." And we win a few of those people over once in a while. But it's a lot have come out of the rope industry, rope access workers, and people who just enjoy climbing, because of course we're defined by all. If you're afraid of heights, we're probably not the right place to be working. And hands-on critical thinkers is really kind of a mantra of who we hire against. So
on that topic, though, it's you mentioned that it's difficult, and you've kept people on with very little work at times, and I know that's definitely a challenge in our industry, definitely with the seasonality, and especially and in events, it's really it can be a bit of feast or famine. But I'm wondering, have you seen that supply network really, I guess, challenged, tested, disrupted due to the pandemic?
Not just us, our supplier. Look at the suppliers, the supply chain. Well, look at the supply chain, let alone the manufacturing environment. Manufacturers are looking for faithful employees who will show up to work. And, everybody is excited when somebody just shows up, let alone good quality show up.
Yeah.
And we have a changing environment of what people's expectations are. Our young kids are, it's a different lifestyle, and that's a whole demographic analysis of what's going to happen next. And when we lose I'm happy not to be in the manufacturing world personally, just because that my life was managing people who made things, and there were some great people that I've grown up with and were craftsmen and proud of what they did. And now, of course, factory work is considered factory work and not a craft. And I don't think there's the same respect. And there is, I'm sure there is, because I respect anybody that puts their hands on things and makes something, or tradespeople that actually do hands-on activity. But it's not, they're immigrants that are going to come in and take those, that we need to come in and take those jobs, because our population here, our kids here have a desire just to make money and quality of life. So many people have shifted their mentality. They're not going to work stupidly like I work, because I work hard because I'm not too smart. I just and that's just the way I am. And Jeff is. So when Melinda says who comes along and works with us, it's we don't force people. We lead by example, because that's what our father taught us. If you're gonna get good people, lead by example and show them what you expect. So that's what we've done, and I think all of my brothers and I are all like that. Andy's probably he's the best balanced for quality of life, and he's smart, and he's the smoothest of us all. That key is to stay healthy, live long, and enjoy all this hard work we've done along the way.
Yeah, it's funny. The family thing is something I can definitely relate to, being in a family business, and people often ask, "What's that like? Is that tough? Like, working with family?" And I'm like, no. And similar to your family, I'm like, the one thing I get out of it is built-in work ethic. You know what I mean? And people that are bought in and that want to be there, and that have a sense of ownership. So
I'll tell you, talking family, because, and again, this is extending on my uncle level, is David Gallagher was part of Cafe. He started it with Sherwood. I can't remember his first name. Anyways, Cafe stands for Canadian Association of Family Enterprise. It's still a going concern. And then that's the US counterpart is the YPO, Young Presidents Organization. And there's all kinds. There's tech groups, there's other forums that have that create forums where business, entrepreneurial spirited people come together and talk about business issues. Anyways, it was huge to me, to Lincoln and I, when we were partners, because it gave a forum to try to communicate in family environments. But you go and look at, and this isn't Canadian, this is international, small family businesses are probably, I'll bet they represent 70 to 80% of the economy, the gross product, production or value of what goes on around the world. And anyways, to have the forums like that can talk about business issues, and I think that IFAI or
ATA now, yep,
ATA needs to facilitate these type of forums to help to give a place. Actually, compliments to whoever set up this little forum.
ATA Connect, yeah.
Connect. Anyways, that's along the lines of creating those type of communications and subgroups because of it. And of course, my uncle Harold and my dad, of course, worked together at one point, and then were true competitors later on, as I was with my cousin Tom. In fact, it was one of our sales guys, Walter Samick, who brought us back together again to do the economic summit in Toronto. Anyways, he facilitated that because he said, you guys have the inventory to put this thing together. Why would you open the door to bring in outside international US inventory to cover this job off? The only way you can do it is to bring your two companies together and take care of this event, just like we would do at plowing matches and the papal visits and these large things. And again, John Lee was instrumental in a lot of those things too. He just as anyways, dynamic resources. But the key is to bring people together to work together, right? And these days, it's probably easier than it was because everybody was single-minded, what they were doing, what they were focused on, and competition was probably a different language in older days. But family forum is a good thing. And I look at, if I had the ability, and I think I'm the baby of our four brothers, or my three other brothers, and yet we all have these different, they're not just skill sets, because I think we have similar skill sets, but it's the dynamic and personalities. Lincoln he's an operations oriented guy, loves organization, keeping tools neat and tidy, making sure that everything's in working order. Jeff is he's sort of a dynamic, always on the move, getting things done, great to put out in the field, great to, measure, check, to be in front of customers, but then to get things done, he's a doer. He loves putting his head down. And I always love the compliment one of our guys, Ron Peters, and it was a pouring rainy day down in New York. Now it was Mamaroneck. Anyways, we were doing two air structures side by side, and this guy called me on the phone because Ronnie's walking back to the truck. So you look at a diagonal line of like, I don't know, 600 feet. And he walks back to the truck to get a tool, and he probably should have had the tool in the first place, shouldn't have had to go and get it. But anyways, and he just doggedly got the job done. Pouring rain, terrible conditions, but got things done. And I that's sort of typical. Jeff wouldn't do it walking; he'd be running because he hates not getting things done. Andy, so number three is he's an architectural, creative, got a flair for fashion, loves colors. He was great in the awning business because that's an expression of what people want to see, right? And he would have been great on doing tension structure work with me on the architectural side. I think he would have just been awesome at leading that process before they got into design engineering. And I like organization more on a project management level and sort of bigger picture, putting things together. So an ambassador of sorts. If I could have brought all of my brothers together to work together, it would have been just a dynamo not to be reckoned with. But that's not how it worked out, because we are entrepreneurial spirits, and we can't work together because there's not one of us that's going to be accountable to the other. So and then you have to say, are we prepared to hire somebody that we'll be accountable to? And we've actually experimented or tried that, and it has never been successful because we'll never be accountable to anybody, because we're I don't know, it's not power hungry. What do you call that when you don't want to give up control? But we've all been successful in our own right along the way, and will continue to be. But it is fun when we get together, because we're all passionate about what we do, and I think we all love what we do.
Jamie, when you're traveling, so you have work in outside Canada, and I know you've been through the US and into Europe and beyond. How do you find, or who are your go-tos for partners when you're not in Canada with your dream team? Like to develop those relationships and find people and businesses that will help you accomplish what your client's looking for.
It's a long list of people like you, Melinda. It's friends along the way, right? It's friends and acquaintances. And I don't know if I have any go-to. I definitely, I know people around the world, and I have no qualms picking up the phone and calling them to sort of check in, and I think I'm more excited by the opportunity to have an excuse to call them with purpose, rather than just to say hi, and not one to just sort of say hi. And so sort of purposeful activities. But I don't know, I think sometimes it's cold calling and saying, look, we're on our way to Los Angeles, and I got to figure out, where the Pacific Center is, and have you ever done any work there? And it just goes from there. And then you sort of find people that have some experience, and who knows, it doesn't even matter what the trade is. It's do they know the place, and who do they use as resources, as riggers, as iron workers, as engineers, consultants, but just going through the list of. But I don't think I very rarely call purposeful to somebody that I know is going to be the go-to right off the bat. So it's just working through it all, and the personalities you get a read from as you're talking to somebody that they're philosophically aligned, or like-minded, or whatever. Pretty soft skills, right? You can't look at they don't provide a bio or a resume of sorts. It's you go by your gut, and hopefully, although they end up on the axis of evil list when they fall down.
I think you touched on something interesting. I think a lot of that does come down to instinct, and I think you develop that over time, right? You start to, you get a feel for, whether people are speaking from experience, if they're coming across genuine, or if it sounds like they're kind of making, promises, and then when you ask the questions, there's no substance there, right? So you kind of you figure that out. Something you touched on earlier, and to be honest, I find you and your brothers, having come from it, and it's great, you guys realized you weren't going to be able to all work together under the same roof sort of thing, because of, being all entrepreneurial, very independent, very, strong-willed, strong characters. But I have to say, honestly, I think you guys could, write a book or give a seminar on, what you've managed to do in this, in the ability to work together from your different companies, from your different places, because I really feel like our industry is kind of rife with, and I've seen a bit of it where, maybe the competition fuels great development and everything, but there's just such bad blood between companies that split off. They ultimately often become like the biggest, manufacturers of certain, technologies or certain items or whatever, but they're fueled by this competition and this almost hatred for one another. And I feel like you guys, and it sounds like you've gone through quite a few different iterations. You've gone through a lot of trial and errors, and I'm thinking like you guys would be a great, and like to give seminars and kind of show people the way of that. There is a way to kind of split off, be competitors, do your own thing, but at the same time, cooperate where you need to cooperate, and more importantly, maintain those family relationships.
Yeah. Wow. Easily lost, right? That's the, and I remember going to a cafe event in Ottawa, and there was a woman, truly a matriarch of the family, and therefore the business, because she would not let business get in the way of her matriarchal role and responsibility, I think, as she put it. And I was dumbfounded by it, because we were completely opposite, right? We were driven and motivated by business, and that was our family conversation. Yet I look back and I think of my dad. We bought property and built a chalet down in the States, where we were every weekend we were away skiing. He bought a boat at one point, and we were sailing and avid racers, and we did a lot of things that were just family oriented activities that were fun. And to be honest, I really struggle with where I would ever find the time to do these things that he somehow, it was part of his schedule to make sure that we were doing these fun things. And so that's a good, I guess, and what does that mean as me as a parent? I'm not being a good example to my kids on a family level. I've been so caught up in business activities and trying to be a good example there that I'm not a well-rounded individual, that's for sure. But I'd like to be, and I guess if you think about it, at least it's one step closer to not doing something about it. And anyways, Judy and I get away and have fun once in a while, but no, we're pretty business oriented, and too much so for sure. No, I'd love to. It'd be fun to be in that world, to consult and to talk at those similar family dynamics. And I think you're right, Mark. You look at the successes that have come from that competitive spirit, that drive to beat your sibling, who there's nobody better to compete with than a sibling. little alone a stranger that you have the compassion to beat them. And so where's innovation come from? It's come from competitive drive, right? So there is an upside to those broken relationships, because there's something that came out of it.
Oh, sure. I think the rest of the world and the industries often benefit from it. I'm just thinking, it's unfortunate that they can't at some point acknowledge and and repair those personal relationships. And
well, my significant other, her father, Alistair McKinley, Scottish, he had a falling out with his sister, and it's unfortunately, and it's the saddest thing. And I've seen this before, and in fact, I beg people to not reconcile, but at least make an effort to say hi, because there's not going to be an opportunity at one point, because they're going to get too old. And can you imagine dying with a broken relationship that you really should have made an effort to mend, and the repercussions of that through the family? I guess what'll come out of it is people will look at that and say, I'll never let that happen. So as much as you have a fight with somebody, you need to make peace on some level, even if you don't have to have a great relationship, but there's got to be an acknowledgement that either it was a stupid reason to have a fight, which is usually in most cases what it is, and in families, that's a pretty sad story. So I guess that's the message, if anything, is make an effort and don't let it go, don't let it fester, and don't let it get out of hand.
I think you touched on some really interesting things actually in your answer, and the part about your dad making that time to kind of gather everybody together and do these extra things and social, like the stories through my family, and then look, we made an effort to. In fact, we just rebuilt the family cottage so that there's room for the extended family and that. But what you're talking about, that time, that like how much they mixed, I always hear about the ridiculous hours they were working and stuff. But there were so many parties where everybody was there and everybody was doing, and there was always, and I'm like, was there more time back then? Was there? Or did they just maybe went ahead with things and didn't really worry about the organizational or who got hurt by what? And, and if they missed any details, maybe they just went ahead with it anyway. I think that maybe that's the difference, but
that's a really good point, because now we fill in so many safety forms that even when we get to a job site, we already lose 2 hours of productive work because of our orientation and our efforts to that's a good conversation in itself, right? The whole, and because I always laugh. We did a project out in Edmonton. It was a warm, what was it called? A warm shelter, a warm fan. It was an insulated. I knocked off a Bird Air product and did a Tensotherm insulated PTFE membrane in an ice rink. So it was a heated space. Obviously, you didn't want the heat to get over to the ice rink. Anyways, our guys were walking to the site, and they had to walk over a wooden bridge over the electrical runs. And anyways, when they got there, they had to do a full day orientation. I won't name the contractor, and safety. And then, of course, we had all our credentials and everything we had to hand in. But they walked across this bridge and they noticed an electrical feed, like significant, like 600-volt cable that was damaged. And anyways, they pointed it out to the safety officer. So that was fine. And they came back the next day. Here it was again. And so the moral of the story was that nobody did anything about it. And this was a truly dangerous situation where, and then of course the safety officer would come in and comment on how we were working, whether it was off ladders or whatever we were doing, not tied off or tied off. Anyways, and would overlook a notified safety concern. And so optics, when people look at things like this, where are their heads? And we live in a world where, so that's just one isolated, situation, but safety has gotten so crazy that it does slow down time. It takes away time we once had in an effort. Now it's a good thing. It's a good effort to be safer and to not have people be hurt and such. But it's got to a point where it's almost, it is ridiculous, because the crux or the purpose of the whole, or the intent of it, is lost. They've lost sight of the end game. They're caught up in what the actions are, thinking that they're preventing something, and they're lost in what the purpose of the. Anyways, you get my drift.
Yeah, we're kind of losing the forest for the trees, basically, right? Like we're.
So that said, there is a lot of lost time that we had, but it was they were dangerous times, because in those days everybody, they partied and drank and got home and got up the next day, and so maybe we don't drink enough. Maybe that's the problem.
Well, maybe. I do often. I look back at that too, and I'm like. Like my generation couldn't keep up with the previous generation, and the next generation doesn't keep up with the generation in that sense, but it's definitely different times. All I could say, based on this, Jamie, we would love to have you back in, honestly, and then for future podcasts, we'd love to get you and your brothers together. I can just imagine, like, this kind of reminds me of a book from a band that was written from all different perspectives, and how people saw the story coming from, one would say, I was doing this, but the guys didn't know it. And they were all like, we knew what he was doing. It was, what I mean? Like, so I could kind of picture those types of stories. So we'd love to get you guys back on. I mean, I just think there's just so much material or so much to cover, and in all of your years of experience, yourself and the entire Gallagher family, that we definitely like to have you guys on for some future podcasts. Unfortunately, I think we're out of time, and even though we've just scratched the surface, but I'd really, really like to thank you for coming on. I think it's incredible. I think this will probably lead to lots of questions. So anybody listening, if you have questions for Jamie, you've heard the level of knowledge and experience that he's had in terms of working in a network, and if you want to get on the IFAA Connect forum, I think that was a great plug. I appreciate that, Jamie. And if folks like Jamie are on there, then it's a great place to get your questions answered and get some great industry knowledge to come to bear on any issues or problems, challenges you might be experiencing out there. Jamie, thanks again so much for coming on the podcast, and we look forward to doing this again in the future.
Thank you, Mark. No, thank you. That was fun, and it's fun to share. And yes, the door is always open.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Talking Textiles Canada series. This podcast is brought to you by Advanced Textiles Association, a not-for-profit association representing the international specialty fabrics marketplace. Learn more about events, workshops, and webinars ATA hosts throughout the year at textiles.org/events.